Well, hello there, and welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial video where we're talking about FileMaker. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these FileMaker tutorials over at FileMakerMagazine.com. In this particular video tutorial, we are taking a look at reducing field counts. We're addressing growth before it happens. A quick little blip about the background of why I'm shooting this video. I'm recently working on a database, and I got to the table, and one of the tables had 4,000 fields. If your solution has close to 4,000 fields, something is wrong with your database. You've got a lot of replication where the structure is not accommodating what needs to happen. But there's also another place where FileMaker racks up a bunch of fields, and that's within the context of the UI. So that's what I'm going to be addressing in the remaining parts of this video. Let's take a look at the file. All right, so here we are with the file, and while this file will seem pretty simple, there's a lot of complex things going on here, but buried within a very simple structure. Now, the first thing that I'm going to show you is the relationship graph. I'm going to open up FileMaker's managed database and show you that what we have right now is absolutely simple. Anybody can figure out what's going on amongst three items. But as you already know with your own database, what ends up happening is you end up having table occurrence after table occurrence after table occurrence after table occurrence, and eventually you've got this right here, where you've got a bunch of different connections all over the place, and you're trying to figure out what the heck you did, and you're also trying to figure out which one of these do I actually need to use. Do I need to create a new table occurrence, or is there a connection that already exists? And in many cases, there's already a connection that exists, but yet a lot of developers will create that new table occurrence, create the connection, and wire it up at the point in time that they need it. Now, our whole goal with a FileMaker database is to keep things as simple and straightforward at the outset and address the potential for growth so that it doesn't grow to that point. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, what I've just shown you right now is just table occurrences. But of course, you can have many different table or fields within a given table. And like I said in the intro, man, if you get up and you're up to 200, 300, 400 fields, something's wrong with your structure in terms of how you're structuring your database from the standpoint of data. But beyond that, because FileMaker has pretty much this ball of wax concept, you can reduce your field count from the standpoint of your UI, and that's what I'm going to be addressing. So let's head into that file. So here's what we have going on in this file. It's a really simple little feature, something where, for example, you have a categorization or you have some items, which in this case I just have some simple colors. They're all categorized based on their main color. For example, dark cyan probably falls within the class of blue. Well, it does actually fall within blue because I have blacks, blues, browns, grays, greens, etc. So all I've done is taken some colors and split them out so that I can see, oh, here are the browns, here are the orange, here's the purple, etc. Now, a common thing is choosing from a group of items, a larger group, and then whittling that down into a smaller group. But on top of that, you've got many other features within your database. In fact, if we take a look here, I have a field right here, which in most cases is a global field, driving a relationship. And you're always going to need a global or a normal field in order to drive a relationship. Here, I also have what looks like could be another field. In fact, when I click on it, you'll notice that it is a field. I click in and I get the field itself. Then here on this side, I have yet another field, which is a selection list. So currently, what I am showing are the fields that are used for data, which are within the portal. There's a number of them. Then I have 1, 2, 3 additional global fields used for the purpose of the UI. Or do I? No, in fact, I have one global field. So let's take a look at what's going on. I'm going to make some selections. I'm going to select to blue. I'm going to click on aqua, click on azure. I'll switch to, let's say, orange, click on a couple there, and you can see that as I'm selecting on these, I'm using conditional formatting here to indicate that the item is selected, but I'm also showing over here on the side. Now, from a pure relational standpoint, how you go about this really depends on your database. But when I go into the define database and look at the tables, you can see that I'm really only dealing with two different tables. But I wanted to point out that the true normalization of this type of selection process may include a third table, or what's known as a join table, where I'm joining between this collection and the available colors, those that directly associate. But within FileMaker, there's a unique aspect that you are able to do this with just 2 tables and 2 fields. That's because FileMaker has this notion called a multi-key, if you're not familiar with that. And a multi-key is simply a return-delimited list of values that can also be used within the context of a relationship. In order to see this most effectively, we can go over to the Manage Layouts, or not go into layout mode, but the Manage Layouts, which is bringing up that window right there. Found that under the File, Manage, and then under Layouts. But here you can see that I have 2 different developer layouts. The one that I'm looking for is Colors right here. I'll click Open down at the bottom. And what we're interested in, what's making the relationship, and the reason that I'm pointing this out is because this may not make sense in terms of those who are familiar with using a join table but not using FileMaker's multi-keys. So for example, this color of Alice Blue, which is in the colors table, when I click in this keys collection, this is simply a text field which can contain a number of keys. So in fact, as I move this out, what we can do is we can work with Alice Blue by switching to blues and saying we want to add Alice Blue to the My Favorites collection. So I'm on a record called My Favorites, and I'm going to add Alice Blue. That got added right there. Now if I switch to another record right here, switch to the another collection, and you can see that it's currently on yellow, but switch it to blue, we can see that Alice Blue is selected here as well. So our multi-key is right here in the keys collection. I can see that here's the key for my favorites collection, and here's the key for my another collection. So this one particular color is now sort of it has a reverse relationship back to the collections table, just simply including all of the keys of all of the collections that that particular color actually belongs to. Think of it in terms of a reverse relationship. It's a little bit easier that way instead of something that would use a join table and join these 2 tables of colors and collections together into a join table. So now that I've addressed that, what we're really after is we're after what happens when the user works within the UI of your FileMaker solution and they want to do a bunch of things. Well, as I was stating, anytime that you have a relationship, that relationship itself needs to at least be based on a field. It can be a global field, it can be a regular field. The global field is going to need to use the very first repetition. In fact, FileMaker only sees the very first repetition of any repeating field for the purpose of relationships. But there's nothing that prevents you from using subsequent repeats on a given global field for other things within your user interface. So here is the big reveal. When we go into the defined database and we go into the fields for the collections, you're going to see that in particular, there's one field that I tend to use in my solutions, and I simply call it input. That particular field, in fact, in this case, it's not even set to a global because I accidentally didn't do that, but I can set it to a global, and it really depends on how you're actually going to maintain on a record-by-record basis the relationships of all of your records. For example, right here, when it's specified as a regular text field, and it's repeating, I'm able to use that repeating field on each record and maintain any of the things that are set within it. Remembering that the first repetition only is what can be used for the purpose of a relationship. So when I move from the another collection, in fact, let's switch this one to brown, and then we'll switch to the other record of the My Favorites, we can see that it's maintaining its connection as blue. So we have blue, and then we have brown. So each record is remembering its own value. But on each record, I don't have 3 additional fields. I just have the one field, because when we go into layout mode, you can see that I have input, which is the first of the multiple repetitions used for gathering user input. This is a user interface input field. It's not a data field. My goal in any FileMaker solution is to limit the number of fields within all tables to just data. and only add fields when absolutely necessary. And if I can get away with it, multi-purpose fields, and then also use repetitions of fields in order to multi-purpose them within that one particular table. Now, you can use a global table. It's been widely known that you can create a dedicated table that the only thing that table has is globals. But in some situations and in some cases, you will have to maintain a relationship in order to work with those global fields. Now, that requires an extra relationship. To me, it's a trade-off. You have to decide, do I want to put all global fields in a dedicated global table and then add an additional relationship, or do I simply want to add one additional field or a few additional fields and then simply add repetitions onto those? Because when the user is working within the UI, each given layout can simply dedicate whatever repetitions of the input field that it wants to use. For example, you can see that the input, I specified 10 repetitions. And those 10 repetitions can be used however I want on each layout uniquely. I can say dedicate repetitions 1 through 5 and never use them for any other layout. Maybe they're reserved for layout A, and then use 5 through 10 for layout B. Or I can use all 1 through 10 on layout A and on layout B. These are temporary input user fields that I'm just going to use on a temporary basis, knowing that the only time that I need to actually maintain something within the actual field is when it's going to be used for a relationship. Now, as I was mentioning just a little while ago, I could make this a global, and if I do make it a global, that means it applies across all records instead of each record maintaining its own values, or I can maintain and keep it as is, just a standard field. So let's take a look at some of the ways that this is actually being used. The first one is super easy. I'm simply using this as a pop-up menu, which you can see right up here in the Appearance tab of the inspector. And that pop-up menu, when we go to the Data tab, is using the values from the color category. So when we select on this and we edit our value list and open that up, we can see that we are using an extremely simple value list. We're simply saying go to the colors table, get the category, and include all values. That's the most simple value list that you can probably have when you're pulling values from a field. Those in the category are all of my main category, what we just saw, blue, brown, gray, etc. But there are times when you get into a very complex situation where you're going to use, say for example, a drop-down. And that drop-down, when you make a selection, what you're going to do is you're going to return the key value, but what the drop-down is actually going to show is the human-readable name of the value that the user picks. And we'll take a look at that. There are also times where you simply just want to gather and collect data input. You just want to have the user input some information. So in this case, I have this replace field, and when I click on it, it activates, and I'm able to input a value such as wow, and then hit return. It uses a script trigger and then replaces all of the values in a tag field on this particular portal. So this one field being used in 3 different places is making it really efficient for me and reducing the total number of field counts. In fact, I can do this in all of my tables, and that's what I do most of the time. So let's take a look at some of the unique aspects of the features that I have here, because these are going to teach you more about how you can actually use FileMaker. Understanding that I'm simply using different repetitions of a particular field is really easy, but how do you actually use them, and what do you need to know about repetitions in order to use them most efficiently? That's what I'm going to explain in the remaining parts of this video. So here's where we dive in. This replace field is a really pretty cool technique. When we go into layout mode, we can see that we have this input field. Now, obviously, I have the word, when we go back into browse, the word replace in there. And you'll notice that if I was to go through the tab order, and of course that field in particular is not in the tab order, but if it was, I simply do not want that particular field to be accessible until I actually allow it. So the way that I've done this is, you can see with the little eye icon that we have right there, that is being hidden. In fact, when we go over to the data, we can see right here that we are hiding when, and actually let me bring up the dialog so that we can see the actual code. The code looks like this. When the getActiveLayout object name does not equal the actual name of that object, which is field replace, then I want you to hide. So this is a really cool way to hide fields, in particular input fields, so that they only show when you actually go into them, and that's when you need them. So that's what I'm doing in this particular case. This object underneath here, when I switch to the Appearance tab, as we can see, is a button. This button is actually performing a script, and that script is the replace script. But we can take a look at some of the parameters that are coming in. And this is something that I want you to notice in terms of using some of FileMaker's logical functions. FileMaker has two logical functions that makes it really easy to work with different repetitions of fields. You'll find them in the logical section, and they are these two right here. The getFieldName, and the getField, field name, and the getFieldName field. So the getFieldName function is going to actually get the name of the field. The getField function is going to take the input of a field name and get the contents of that field. When you use these two particular functions in conjunction with some of FileMaker's other features, such as setFieldByName, then that's what's going to give us a lot of power. So you can see right here what I'm using is I'm using the getFieldName pointing to the collection's input field repetition number 2. So if you have not used it before, the way that you reference repetitions within FileMaker code is with the open and closing brackets and then the number of the repetition that you want to use. So I'm passing two things in this particular parameter. I'm passing a return delimited list, but the first item is a field name or a field reference, and the second thing is my object name. Now, I really didn't have to do this in this particular implementation of this script. The only reason that I did it is because I want to show you so that when you come across how you access repetitions and working with fields, this is how you can parse things out. I knew in this particular implementation that I am explicitly working with the second repetition. So I could have very easily said and passed, I want you to go to the second repetition of this particular field. But because we can't target a field based on abstraction, such as you can set a field by name, you can't go to a field by name, but you can go to an object by name. So as we take a look at the position tab here, we can see that this particular field has the object name of field replace. Now, the unique thing that you need to know about FileMaker is FileMaker and all of its repetitions are specific to each repetition. So it doesn't matter whether you're using the goToObject function or the goToField or the setField, anything that deals with a field. If it's dealing with a repetition of a field, then that must be supplied, even if you're going to go to the object. I would prefer if FileMaker had simply made it so that the goToObject was absolute, regardless of whether you go into a particular repetition. But when we take a look at the script of the replace and we open that up, you can see that I'm doing two things. And again, I stated I'm doing this for the purpose of learning. The first thing that we're grabbing is that first parameter, which is a field reference. So I'm setting a variable of field to get the first value of the script parameter. I'm setting the variable of object to get the second repetition or the second value of the script parameter, and that is the name of the object. Now here's something that you probably have not seen before, even if you've been dealing with FileMaker for a long time. Now the object that I'm going to target is that object that I named field.replace. I named it simply, oops, didn't mean to close that. I named it field.replace, in case you forgot. So we'll take that off, and we will look at the repetition. So here what I'm doing is a number of things with embedded calculations. The first thing that I'm doing is I'm taking the inbound field and I'm substituting the open bracket. So let's say we have a field that looks like this. We've got table, double colons, then we've got field name, then we've got repetition. So what we want to do in this particular case is we are substituting this particular value with a return. We're then going to grab this part using the get value, grabbing the second part of these two parts that were created, and we're going to coerce or force this string into a number using the get as number, which actually rips off the trailing bracket. That's what's going to allow me to specify which of the repetitions that I want to use. Now again, going back, why do I need to specify a repetition if I'm going to an object where I've given that object an explicit name? This is one of the byproducts of working with FileMaker and the way that repetitions, going all the way back to FileMaker 2, 3, and when repetitions were actually implemented, repetitions are not used for data storage anymore, or they shouldn't be. You should be using relational structure. They are now used for user interface, for simplification, for things like you can show progress bars, you can do all kinds of little things. They're basically like a single-dimensional array. So specifying the repetition here is what allows this goTo object to go to the right object because that object is repetition number 2. And that is exactly how we're going to work with repetitions when we're going to be passing them to scripts. Now there's a custom function that I have embedded in this particular file, and it is this function right here, active FQFN, which simply stands for fully qualified function or field name, not function name. This is what you're going to get returned when you're in an actual active field. So if we go into browse mode on this particular file, we open up the data viewer and we create a new watch variable. And that watch variable is the active fully qualified field name. This particular custom function is simply a combination of a number of functions that you get under the get functions. For example, we have get active field name, we have get active field table name, and as we scroll down, we have get active repetition number. All of those three parts are what makes up whatever you're in when it comes to a field. And that's exactly what the active fully qualified field name is returning. So as I zoom back out and we say evaluate, right now we're not going to get anything. In fact, we're getting the double colons, which is being injected because there is no active field name. But if I move this off to the side and I click my replace function and I jump into my field, you can see that now my active fully qualified field name function returns the table name or the table occurrence name, the field name, and the repetition, giving me all of the parts that I need if I was going to use this within the context of a script that uses abstraction. So within a script, I'm able to use things such as the set field by name because I can pass that field name in as a value as an inbound parameter. So some of the other things that we can do with regards to using these input fields and using them in multiple places across our UI are things such as drop-downs. Now, when you look at a value list, or the way that you typically want to use a value list, you typically want to use keys behind the scenes, but display your data. So when I make a selection here, and let's say it's the blanched almond color, you can see that what I get is a representation of what I actually selected, blanched almond. When I go into layout mode, what you notice here is that this field is obviously my field that is being used for input in order to reduce my total field count. It is repetition number 3. And when I go into browse mode, you can see that because this is a drop-down list, it's actually returning my key value. Now, this is a very common thing that you're going to find in FileMaker solutions, and that is when you want to be able to provide a value list, such as colors, where I want the user to be able to specify the color, But the value that I'm going to use first is going to come from an ID value or a key, but I'm also going to display values from the second field, which is the human readable version, which is the name of the color. Now in this particular case, I am using the functionality of showing values only from the second field, but the only object that works with this particular feature in FileMaker is a pop-up menu. It does not work with a drop-down menu or a drop-down list. So we want to actually be able to control this. The easiest way to do this is, rather than overlaying or adding on yet another field, is to simply use a merge variable. And that's exactly what I have right here. I have a piece of text which is using a merge variable of the name overlay, but additionally, it gives me the opportunity to inject a tab and then use the actual Unicode character for the downward arrow. So this gives me a little bit of creative control with regards to this particular field. Now, when I make the selection into this field, I have a number of things going on. In this case, there are two of them. There is an onObjectEnter, where we have a script named onObjectEnter input 3, and onObjectModify input 3. You can see that I tend to name these so that they're very easy to identify once I go into my solution. But if we take a look at these by opening the scripts, we can see that the onObjectEnter is simply doing one thing. It is going to clear the actual contents of that particular field. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is because when I click through this actual piece of text, I go into this field, and this field will automatically select, by virtue of the fact that it's a drop-down menu or drop-down list, it will select all of the contents, and that is the key value. That's the key that's hidden behind the scenes. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to wipe that out because I don't want the user to see that. The cool thing is FileMaker still remembers, once the menu is loaded, it still remembers what that selection was previously. In fact, if we put those back together as an overlay, you can see that when I select, this field has been emptied out. It is currently clear and the key value is no longer there. But the menu still maintains its selection of blanched almond. So it's simply just put that value back in. If I was scrolled down and I was on something like cornflower, selecting again, FileMaker does reveal that, even though this value is empty. The other part of this equation is the onObjectModify. So on this, you can see again, very simple in terms of what we've got going on. We simply set the variable, the global variable of overlay, and in this case, this is yet another way that you can reduce your total count of objects in FileMaker. In this case, it's not just fields, but in this case, it would be a relationship. Typically, you need one additional relationship from the global field or from the local field in order to get the actual name of the value. Well, in this case, I don't want to have that extra relationship just for my UI. I don't need it. Plus, because I'm using the third repetition, I would have to add yet another field in order for the purpose of maintaining a relationship, just so I could get the name of the color in order to put into this global field to have it on top. So we don't want to do that. We don't want the extra field. We don't want the extra relationship. We don't want the extra table occurrence. We want to keep things simple and use FileMaker's code in order to get at what we want. The easiest way to do this is using execute SQL, which simply runs a very quick find, pulling the contents of that find directly into the global variable that I'm using as an overlay above my actual field. So you can see that when we close things out, and of course there's a refresh right there where we're going to refresh the object that is on top, which is the named object. But you can see right here the overlay. If I select in, I get my opportunity. Actually, let's move this above so that we can see it. But there's my key, which is being stored behind the scenes. And you can see right there, without any extra table occurrences or extra fields, I'm able to get my value to display properly on top of my key, which is stored behind the scenes. And to wrap things up, about the only thing that I haven't shown you in this file is how this toggle actually works. Typically, I use a custom function which has all of the code that you're going to find within the script in order to toggle a value. And your script can be super simple as well. In fact, you can do it directly on the field itself or on the object. In this case, because I'm just simply displaying the content, I opted to put a button here and also here as well on the list of all of my favorite colors within this collection. But this button is simply running a script called value toggle. In fact, when we take a look at that by invoking the debugger and clicking the Alice Blue, we can see that we're running the script named value toggle right there. And as we step through that, you're going to see that I'm passing again, just like with the replace, I'm passing in a number of pieces of information. In this case, I'm passing in 2 pieces of information. One is the actual value that I either want to remove if it exists or append if it doesn't exist. I'm simply going to toggle that value within the context of a list. What is the list? Well, the list is the second of the 2 parameters, which is a field reference. So here you can see that the value is being set to the first parameter. In fact, if we open up the data viewer and watch that and push that in, scroll to the bottom, we're going to see that right there, value was actually set to the value that I want to work with. The field, when I hit and move that one, is this field name right here. I'm passing in the field name using the getFieldName function that I talked about earlier. Then, using the setFieldByName, which is using indirection, that is going to allow us to set whatever is in the field variable, making this script useful across my whole solution. If I want to, all I have to do is pass in the value that I want to work with and the field that I need to work with against that value, and this script will work no matter where I'm at in my solution. In this case, the final set field is simply going to toggle that value. If it already exists, it will take it out. If it doesn't exist, it will simply append it. And then the final commit will simply commit the records or commit the changes, which forces the refresh of the portal here behind the scenes. And that's basically what this file does. It simply uses one field in order to accomplish all collection of input from the user. Really, the only time that you need to have additional global or additional fields for the purpose of user input is if you're going to maintain those relationships. Even in the context of a search box, which I've used a popover in order to, for example, up here where this bug is, let's pretend that this was a magnifying glass, and you click on that, and then it reveals a number of fields that you can use as input fields for different things that you would want to search. You can maintain multiple repetitions, input 1, input 2, input 3. And if those are all global fields, those will stay persistent and local to the client as long as that client has that FileMaker solution open. So the next time that they open up that search dialog box, all of their values are stored for them. So that would probably be the second time that you maybe need to maintain a second global for the purpose of input, and that is if you want to persist or retain the values that were used, say for example in the context of a search. But for the most part, I highly encourage that you do everything that you can to think creatively to reduce your total field count, because inevitably, as any FileMaker solution grows, it will get more and more complex to the extent that either you can't figure it out yourself, but definitely somebody else can't come in and figure it out as well. So document heavily and keep things as trim as you can and as efficient. And hopefully that's what you're getting out of this particular video. As always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.